us started today, so I'll turn it over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay. I'm going to go right straight to the screen, the slide program. I'm going to start. Along with me speaking today, it's going to be Tony Celis, who is the acting chief of the bird banding laboratory, to give their perspective and some of where the direction that the lab sees these type of operations going. Is everyone seeing a slide PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay. This is new, so we'll see how this goes. I'd like to welcome you to the Landbird Migration Banding Initiative of the Midwest Migration Network. It's one of 4 initiatives that will be being gone over here in the next couple of days. On Thursday afternoon, we'll have kind of a wrap up as well. I'm going to go first part here through I'm going to go through the kind of the reasons this even started. I'm going to turn it over to Tony to give kind of more of the bigger picture viewpoint from the bird banding laboratory and directions I see this going. And then I will take up the last part. We'll have a little bit of time for some questions for anyone that would like to ask Tony specifically any questions or anything up to that point. Pretty much, if you have questions as we go through here, feel free to, I need some help from Stephanie on making sure we get that taken care of, but we'll try to take questions as we go as well. In the last part then, I'm just going to go over really what the nuts and bolts of the program is, reasons why it is the way it is, and how it can interact with the other initiatives as well to give us basically overall better bird monitoring and conservation. The banding programs, as most of you are familiar with, are either done by just strictly volunteers or observatories or academia, universities. They require extensive skill and expertise that goes beyond many of the other methods that we might have available to us. There may be questions being asked at the local level, regional level, and as now we're going to hear more about through these whole 3 days, is we're really looking more almost hemispheric in the life cycle. Problem we've had with migration banding is there's been a lack of direction. For better than 20 years now, we've had the MAPS program for breeding populations, and the MOSI program has been active for some time, looking at more of a wintering project as well. And so we want to try to get some direction. So we're gathering data similar across the board so they can be used in these bigger picture questions that are extremely important in today's world. First thing we looked at was what is already out there. There was a question, is there even a banding activity out there that's a starting point? And really for the Midwest region, this map, the 1 through 5, had to do with the amount of birds banded per year in migration, 5 being 10,000 or greater. So we don't have many large stations, but it really was well distributed across the Great Lakes. There are definitely some holes that needed filling in for a broadband cross view of birds. And there was a lot of other different ways that banding could fit into. You have banding, there's counts, point counts, radar is available out there, acoustics, the list, and then we have other things like telemetry, isotopes, and then just going through literature as well. The whole purpose here is really to start gathering data that's useful in the life cycle models. This is the future direction for landbird, really bird conservation. We need to look at what's going on with the birds across the entire life cycle, in other words, the whole year. Migration provides some advantages in that, because many of these species are not something that can be looked really studied in many parts of the years because of where they go. Where in migration, we do have ability to look at maybe some of the snapshots of some of those. And we have the experience of the waterfowl life cycle models to build off of. There are definitely limitations, and there's lots of obstacles in gathering information. Many of the species we need maybe the most information for are the ones we're least likely to get because of their rarity. So it's coming up with different projects to do that. But the primary needs of a life cycle model is age ratios, first year winter survival, connectivity between breeding, stopover, and wintering habitats, and maybe some questions we haven't even thought of to ask yet. Age ratios is very difficult to get at without massive data sets. And migration is a time when we maybe can't handle those large numbers of birds. And if a well-organized study across the continent, those age ratios start having some meaning that can be useful just as they are in waterfowl. Another big problem and concern is the first winter survival. Who is coming back? And that's really where we have an advantage in this program over the waterfowl models, is that we have the ability to gather data in the spring to look at age ratios and timing and things like that to get feedback into maybe what happened on the wintering grounds and start tying these together. So it gives us some real advantages there. Some of the specific questions we can get at, this is just an example of some of the work we've done at our station here in Northern Ohio, but can be definitely expanded on when we have a coordinated network where everybody's gathering data the same way. It's not just to know that it's magnolia warbler as far as bird conservation, but we need to know more about that, how it is doing. There's differences in age migration, there's difference in sex migration. All these things are components that with a large enough sample size across a large enough portion of its range, we have the ability to maybe start getting at some of these big picture questions and concerns that the life cycle models will need so that we can better manage these birds and conserve them. There's just a lot of different questions that we can get at when we have a standardized methodologies in data collection. And that's what I'll be covering in the second portion of my presentation a little later. We've also got, the big concerns that are out there laying climate change, things like that are going to require a lot of information to really look at. This is just a real quick, some work I'm working on right now with another individual, Gary White, in looking at, we have the ability to really look, is climate changing occurring and how are these birds responding to that? And, in this example here, hermit thrush, which is a short distance migrant, is showing some change, whereas the Swainson thrush, a neotropical migrant, isn't affected by changes in weather that we're seeing potentially going on with climate change. But these are the kind of questions we can get at. This is just from one station. We need this from across the entire range to really get at, and that's where we need to be collecting data the same way. So that's kind of the reasoning behind really getting started on this whole venture of developing a migrational network. Is to help get at these big picture questions of climate change and migrational timing and the age structures of populations that the models will need. And at the same time, bring different banding stations together in commonalities so that we can look at it across the landscape in different locations for some of the questions that may be related to the development of wind power or other aerial structures to inform the agencies that are going to have to do regulatory decision making, to have a database that they can look at across the entire region that is comparable, so they can make these decisions that are going to have to be made at some point by some regulatory agency. So that's kind of the background of it. I want to now turn this over. First, I mentioned here in this slide here the actual protocols that make up the procedures and protocol of the Midwest Migration Network Landbird project is available on our website, the Midwest website, and I'm sure Stephanie will be passing that along as well through the chat for you. But I'd like to turn it over now to Tony. If you would like to take control of the screen and for the bird banding laboratory.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to try to share here. You will see my presentation here.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Great. Well, yes. My name is Tony Celis. Antonio, you can call me Tony, of course. And first, I want to say thank you to Mark and for inviting me to give this talk and try to give some comments from the BBL in regards to this coordinated effort. And just to give you a little bit of outline of my talk, I'm going to try to provide context on how contributors, collaborators of the BBL have changed over time, shaping the BBL goals and role to help advance science. Share a little bit about the BBL views in regards to the large-scale coordinated banding efforts, and ultimately explain a little bit about how the BBL is trying to support these coordinated efforts, such as the migration or landbird migration initiative. I'm going to put a little bit my picture here. Can you see my slide? Is it changing? Yes, it is changing. Okay. Well, just to give you a little bit of context of what we've been doing over the last 100 years, we were established in 1920. So this year is 100 years. This is the centennial of the BBL. And it is really nice, in addition that we are hoping to celebrate through multiple events throughout the year, it's a really great time for us to think back about what we've done, how we evolve over time, how our role have evolved over time, and look at basically the documentation of basically what we did in the initial years. So since 1920, basically when the BBL was established, we were focused on supporting the collection, archiving, management, and dissemination of information from banded and marked birds in North America. Of course, was kind of one main goal was to track movements of birds. And of course, it's not just that, it's basically try to think about all the ecology and biology aspects of those birds migrating and moving through the landscape. But in 1923, we got together with the bird banding office in Canada, and we realized that our birds were basically moving north to south, crossing political boundaries. And we realized the importance of working in a coordinated and a collaborative fashion. So we jointly administer now the North American bird banding program. And since then, we've seen so many successes, and it's been really fun work together to tackle issues and evolve together and advance our science. One key part of those initial years is who was our base, basically, who were our contributors, who were our partners. And as you can imagine, in the early years, most of the work related to the BBL was done by, or the data collected was done by banders who were scientists, were strictly scientists, which very specific scientific questions. They had their individual projects. And then once the banding became a little bit more well-known among scientists from federal agencies to state agencies start kind of getting together And that's how they realized, and perhaps because they came from similar agencies or similar work and questions and agendas, is how they start working collaboratively, and they make great successes. One of the examples that I want to mention is the work of the USGS in coordination with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to manage migratory birds, basically focusing on those birds who had clear migration routes, and together they put together the flyways, Atlantic, Mississippi, Central Pacific, and then established basically whole monitoring coordinated scheme with collaborations, multiple partners to basically facilitate the management of migratory birds and their habitats. To me, this is one of the many, or I guess the best example of how coordination and collaboration is key for successful and effective science. Just to give you a little bit more details about this program, it's a system that is well organized and is effective. Since the 50s, each flyway, one of the 4 flyways, has a council consisting of 4 representatives from each state, provincials. Within every flyway, the councils are also advised by flyway technical committees consisting of biological staff with doing pre-advanced things and analytical approaches and all that stuff, really bringing on all the hard science of the bird management and conservation work. The technical committees evaluate the population and habitat information, and then they make the recommendation to councils on matters on the migratory bird conservation. And then finally, all together, they share the information to keep developing management recommendations as a yearly basis. In regards to the banding, the Division of Migratory Bird Management coordinates the banders from various states, local agencies, tribal agencies, in an ongoing banding efforts. Ultimately, the Migratory Bird Program biologists and the U.S. Geological Survey leads their way with the modeling techniques and the development of analytical approaches to look at that banding and recovery data. And then these ways how they ultimately predict the harvest and other take that happens every year or is recommended every year, and ultimately having a better understanding of the environmental factors that drive migratory populations. So ultimately, thanks to all that banding data and all the efforts of coordination and collaboration is how we have the harvest management and annual waterfowl hunting regulations. So again, I'm mentioning this to me because it's a great example how they put together all the pieces to being able to, in a coordinated fashion, to tackle those ecological questions they had and manage bird populations, which to me, as I said, is a good example when we think about Midwest Migration Network and how we're trying to, or you guys are trying to integrate everything. So I think it's just a good example of how both coordination and collaboration are key here. Now, in the more recent decades, it seems like our base vendors changed drastically from, as I mentioned before, from scientists and federal state agencies contributing most of the banding data to the BBL. Now we have a lot of organizations and vocational banders who are also banding, also contributing stuff. They are joining not just to contribute, but also to publish and bring information to local or regional journals, peer-reviewed journals, international journals, and also they bring together the outreach and the educational component, which is, I will say, it's a relatively new or very different from what we thought about banding 100 years ago or 50 years ago. So yeah, it's clear, and as you probably have seen, just in the last 20 years, with so many bird watching activities, bird watchers and new generations getting interested in birds, loving birds a lot, we see an amazing increase on observatories, organizations, everyone looking for banding opportunities and to ultimately, after training and enough formality of their work, to become an organization or say, observatory or a banding station. And ultimately goes to our banding lab to request a permit. So I just wanted to give context on how things change and how we see coordinated efforts now with more importance. And what I want to say basically is why I'm here and how can the BBL ultimately can improve these coordinated efforts or at least give some support. So basically, I feel like, as you know, we, the BBA, the USGS Bird Banding Lab grants the federal permits. Somebody wants to hold bird and put a band has to go through our permitting office, and we go through a rigorous process where they need to request a permit, show their training, define their goals of the project, etc., and ultimately we grant that permit. Obviously, being there and being basically a bottleneck for a lot of the banding activities that are just starting, it's very important for us because we can think about multiple ways how the BBL can support these coordinated programs. And it's all related to permitting needs. Basically, if the program is growing really fast, it's going to involve multiple banders and multiple banders, multiple permit numbers, multiple master banders, multiple sub-permits. And anyway, a lot of coordination that needs to be also considered at the permitting level. And I know it's very administrative and tedious for many, but it's part of the process to get your federal permit. But also thinking about coordination, coordinated and collaborated groups, it's key that we are also aware of what's happening with that group, with the program, and inform those people who want to get banders. We have tons of people who request permits simply to do banding, and sometimes they don't even know what they want to do. They may have all the training, they may have everything necessary except scientific project. Not for us, the BBL, knowing what are all the coordinated programs and maybe how these people willing to do the banding voluntarily may fit into these programs is key. And maybe we can help a little bit on that part. Another thing that we think we can help a lot is when we think about a database. You think about ideas, how we can restructure our database to basically, I'm looking at the partnerships stuff. Think about if we have good knowledge of the coordinated group who wants to start, we can have communication since day one and start working together towards finding the better ways to deal with the complexities of building a program. For example, we can provide support for coordination with other banding schemes. There are many projects, especially this one is migration. They're going to need at some point to have some coordination with other banding schemes along the Americas, whoever has a banding scheme. We can help on that. We can also support or encourage coordination with other groups, particularly if we know that you have as a program clear goals, but we also know that there are some other groups or scientists within our agency or outside our agency, or outside the government that we think that may be key to collaborate and integrate to your program. It's key. So I think overall we can really think as with those programs as partners, create a real strong partnership and work together towards moving forward on that stuff. I mentioned before, another advantage of being in the BBL is that we receive all the data from you anyway. And since the beginning, we started with very basic data, but I think we can start thinking more about those coordinated projects and programs and help them from the data management perspective. we can start thinking about how we may redesign or restructure our database system, and think about those programs who are doing really well and how we can use program-specific protocols in our database management that align with your needs. And we also have sort of like a different way of seeing things now. We are also thinking of data coming from these programs as a more like a data set package. And as you know, for having a data set package, we need to include all the extra information that you are collecting that is important for you to answer the question or tackle the goal that you set from day one in your program. So I have examples here in the slide. Think about including additional data in our database for your program. Project description, as an example, effort. Effort is being key for many. We know effort is a very difficult thing to define as a data manager, but we know that you know what is effort, what is your effort, what it means for you. So knowing and having all this information in the BBL, we can find ways to collect that data. Study site, sample unit, and it's the same for additional data that you're collecting. I'm sure there are a lot of data that we are not collecting currently that will benefit a lot your program if we collect that. Also, we can think about too that how the programs are evolving all the time. We have to be ready in our database to cope with those new additions or changes in your protocol. We have to find ways to deal with that. Basically, I have here flexibility of incorporating data from new study methods and new technologies. I know that every program is evolving, and we have to be able to evolve along with the program and at least align with your needs. And ultimately, I think the last part is probably the key part, and why I was thinking about data sets is like, if I feel like we can collect all the data that it's important to you, and we can define every single field of data we collect, well, scientists who in the future will analyze your long-term data will be able to aggregate those data. So I think it's very important to keep thinking from our perspective on how you can better aggregate data across. And I bet that these words ring to many of you who've been working on long-term data sets. For example, Pete Mara was talking this morning about the banding and all the migration, all the work from the Smithsonian group, Pete and Emily Cohen, about how to analyze connectivity, or the recent paper from Kristen Covino, who analyzed 50 years of data. I mean, that is the people who realizes how difficult it is to aggregate data and use data from the BBL in some cases. So we are aware of that, and we're thinking that we know more about the coordinated programs, and we team up with them, and we help them as much as we can. We're going to be able to bring data in a better format that ultimately in the future is going to be more easy, or more easy to aggregate overall. Another thing that I think is key from the data management perspective is that because we are managing long-term data, it's a lot of data, and we have a lot of experience on data collection. And I'm not saying data collection in the field, and I'm not saying you don't have experience about it, but the fact that we receive thousands of rows of data as a daily basis, we learn a lot about the patterns of the complexities of collecting data, formatting data, cleaning data, submitting data to us, and for us to archive that data and later to being able to disseminate that data. So that really gives us a much broader perspective about the complexities of all these issues, and this is where we can help you a lot. And based on all that information, we also think clearly about what are the needs for any coordinated program. And I have listed here a few things, 6 things here. It's clear that the coordinated program needs to have a well-defined goal. I mean, it seems like that is number one. And we are all scientists, so we kind of know that's usually the case for every science we do. The study design also, it's key, the study design. We can really help on telling you or about our experiences and the difficulties of using our data after we collect it from you. Standardized data, it's key to standardized data. That's something that a lot of you coordinated programs are trying to do, but I have to say there are many coordinated programs who are not standardizing data. So we can really help you on point out those key factors that we think that will make a program successful. Also, it's very important that data is stored, that are stored centrally, and that's why we can definitely help, or at least advise if it's in the case that you guys want to store your own data. Also, make sure that data is always available to analysts and researchers. Another key factor is publish results. I think we always encouraging coordinated groups to publish the results. It's not always, believe it or not always happens. So it's important that we keep telling them to publish the results. So we can move into the last point, that program needs to be revised periodically and always go through perhaps external reviewers to see how the program is evolving, how it's been doing, and what's next for that program. We can really help a lot on that. And now I want to, just to finish this brief talk, I want to quickly mention and put in perspective the landbird migration network that Shieldcastle started. And one of the things that I can say is that we are really supporting the network as much as we can. It seems like it's a really good example for us to talk about, because not just because it's starting, but also because Mark was with us since day one. He was asking all the right questions, how to do it, how to start. He was asking for advice, and we helped as much as we could. Once he put together a manual, he brought the manual, says, what do you think from your perspective as a large-scale data management repository? What do you think about the science that you guys think is needed? So he was very focused on placing the network in a way that it really aligns with a national perspective, including the permitting side, the administrative part of the banding data, collecting. I want to point out a few things. He was very clear also about the research questions. I know that for now they are broad, but I know he's working a lot on narrowing down, and it's not just him, it's all the group. Also, he's really focusing on the standardization on avian migration banding data. So the protocol is all straight. He got a lot of support from the manuals from MAPS and Institute of Bird Population, which is great. They have a lot of experience on coordinated projects. Another thing is very key for the network is that he's always thinking about the network of collaborators and cooperators, because he always told us about how he can put together all capacities needed to move the project forward through the integration of different partners and collaborators. So we think the BBL thinks is great, because we feel that's the way we can move faster and a more effective way. And ultimately, it's great that the Landbird Migration Initiative is thinking about filling the gaps. And it's something that he already mentioned a few slides before, where he's thinking about how MAPS and MOSI are collecting data and how the migration data is needed if we want to think about full cycle or annual cycle And as I said, we just pretty much support the network as much as we can, and we are happy to work and do our best to accommodate the banding and help them as much as they can. And it's not just for the migration, it's for any coordinated groups. And I think coordination and collaboration, we realize how important it is, and perhaps is one of the key steps we're going to make for the next, for the future of the BBL, which is being able to work with partners directly, incorporate their programs and help them in basically diversify, but all in the science, but also work together with our vendors. And I think that's it. If you have any questions, comments, I'm happy to answer that. And I will pass everything to Stephanie and Mark.
Thank you, Tony. We would like to open, we got a little bit of time built in here. Anyone has specific questions? Trying to read some of the chat that's coming in. I have one question here, Tony, who's seeing from that's, can you give an update on the revision of Bandit?
Excuse me, can you repeat that?
Can you give an update on the revision of Bandit?
Oh yeah, that is, I mean, as you know, we've been going through many changes in the USGS bird banding lab. We had our chief retire about a few months ago, and that's why I'm acting chief right now. And but also our center is merging with another center. So we're having a lot of changes right now, but in our agenda, and we know how critical it is, we're trying to bring the Bandit, basically face off the Bandit software we have right now, and to move it into our Banders portal. We've been working on that for a little bit of a year, basically, on all the design and think about different things. Of course, it's just in progress, but it's definitely something that we need to resolve soon. We may have a few options, and we are basically considering all of them. But yes, we know it's a critical issue, and we hope that we are gonna, I mean, as you know, software is not useful anymore because it's very difficult to synchronize what you have and what we have and what we need. So we hope that the Bander portal will have the ability to receive, basically receive your data well and even do your checkups and everything. And I believe I gave a few presentations about the ideas on what we have on the Bander portal for submitting your data. So I will keep you posted on all that. Anyone else? Mark?
I guess question I have, we've discussed it right now, and I'll cover it a little later as well. Before I go into that, just got another question here. How soon do you think the new portal for Bandit will be ready as far as the data coming in that way? It's hard to answer. I think we are gonna make some hard decisions probably soon, and that will define when it is. But I think at this point it's hard for me to say when we're going to do it. But as I said, we recognize it's a critical need, and it's a critical need not just for you; it's also for us. It's taking us a lot of time to deal with Bandit submissions right now, so it's also on our own interest just to move to a Bandit portal or web Bandit system as soon as we can. I guess a question I have for the network itself, as I said, I will cover a little bit more here in the second part, but right now there's two different locations data is going to be going through from the network. One is to the banding lab, which will be banding data and recapture data at this point in time. with all the other portions going to the Midwest Avian Data Center. One of the big important parts of that, of course, is effort data. Do you see in the near future, or are we looking down the road a little bit yet, on the lab taking that basically critical piece of information that makes banding data have much more value, having it housed at the BBL?
Yeah, well, we already worked for the last year, basically, and getting all the different, setting up all the needs that we have. And we spent a lot of time going into how to define effort and how effort could be useful for scientists in the short term, mid-term, and long term. So we really have the idea of how we're going to do it. To be honest, it's all about how basically we're waiting for the chief to come to the BBL. We need to set, once we basically officially have a chief in the bird banding lab, because right now I'm just acting chief. Once we have a chief, it's going to be up to the chief to define the priorities. But that point of collecting the extra data, like effort, it's in one of those points of the priority list. So that's what I say. Like, I think it's going to be up to the new chief to decide what are going to be the first things that we need to tackle. We know that bandit is kind of number 1, 2 maybe, but collecting additional data, it's another one. It seems like and I think I mentioned before, we are going to try to completely redesign the database. And that is the perfect moment to include all those things. And most of the time we spent over the last year is just thinking and designing identify what are the critical needs that fit our new perspective on the bird banding lab, where we can think about data sets, we can think about making sure the data we have can be aggregated, can be used, and can be understood by any scientist or any analyst in the future. So yeah, we are happy to take on the challenge on getting more complex data, and also work a little bit with through partners, do a lot of things. For example, you mentioned that your data is going to go to 2 different sites, right? One was the BBL and the other one was the AKN? Or...
Yeah, it's the Midwest Data Center, which is a node.
Well,
yes.
I mean, if you think about it, that is great. So one of the approaches that we are thinking too is that being mindful about the capacities that are available out there, and the capacities that we don't want to engage because it completely brings us into a complete different direction as a BBL. So, but thinking in partnerships and integrate the capacities of all the partners, we think is the key to do it. So I imagine if for some reason we decide that we don't want to completely go and engage into collecting all the detailed telemetry data, for example, well, we should find ways that my database can connect to, let's say, MoveBank. I'm going to use this just as an example. Let's say there's an identifier in our data that also connects to MoveBank. And there's a way that an analyst in the future can bring the data from the BBL, but also the data from MoveBank, and maybe do an integration of telemetry data in banding. This is just one example. Similar ways is something that perhaps you are thinking with the Midwest Monitoring Network, where you are thinking, what about the energy or collision initiative, or whatever, radar, acoustics, all that stuff. The point is to being able to think big picture and have the ability in your data structure to being able to connect with other sources of information. So I think that could be key. So even if there are data that we don't want to bring along, we want to find ways that we know where the other part of the data set is hosted. We can always keep track of that. I don't know if that was clear, Mark.
Yes, and I think that's what we've tried to build in to the MMN as well, as having those connective fields and everything. Another question has come in here. Does the BBL consider operation of a MAP station and a migration station sufficient to merit a banding permit, or does an individual also need another research project?
I'm trying to read it and see if I can. Would you mind repeating that one?
It's, does the BBL consider operation of a MAP station and migration station sufficient to merit a banding permit, or does an individual also need another research project?
No, actually, and that's what I was thinking, that one of the things that I mentioned in the talk is that now we are clear on the benefit of coordinated projects. And if it seems like there are more banding, it seems like a lot of people is looking for banding opportunities. If they are banding opportunities, one of them is coordinated projects. So yes, we basically encourage, and even today, people comes with the questions, and the question says, my questions are based on MAPS, and I want to join MAPS program. And they talk with IBP, they talk with us, and it's a merit for them. So yeah, it doesn't have to be a specific project, but we just want that the person has enough knowledge and understanding to understand what he's doing. Because if you think about it, even if it's coordinated project, you still have to be aware of what are you doing and why you're doing, and perhaps even work on your data by yourself at some point. So yes, but yes, definitely there is merit for those coordinated projects. And right now, it seems like we are going to be thinking more about which groups we consider as coordinated enough that we want to provide full support. And I'm sure there are other groups who are coordinated, but they still need to work more on filling out all the requirements. That, I mean, the fact that there are just many people working on the same thing, but no questions or no clear goals or no defined methodology or standardized methodologies, it's an issue, right? So we want to make sure, at least from the BBL perspective, that that coordinated group, it really has all the key components that we all scientists agree are needed. So yeah, no, definitely anyone who wants to join one of those coordinated efforts, it's merit. And of course, there's in the permitting part, there's many questions about the experience and training. So those two things are key for us to ultimately grant permit.
Very good. Is there any other questions out there? Well, I think maybe we'll just move on with the program. We're a little bit ahead of schedule right now, but that's fine. And we will just continue on, and I'll take the screen control back over here to Anthony, I think.
Here.
Just a second here. Get this up and then. I'd seen there was a question early on that I might have missed. Can someone, I think it was maybe the very first question. Stephanie, can you bring that back or read that out?
I just pasted it in the chat.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, because right moment I'm not able to get to the chat for some reason.
So from Jessica, I think one of the key challenges moving forward with regards to reusing and integrated data of these types is going to be getting our colleagues to provide structured or semi-structured metadata as mentioned, but how do we change, or how we change this culture boils down to what's in it for me or us. The BBL has an amazing opportunity to lead efforts in the bird community to really facilitate a more open and interoperable bird data landscape. Has the BBL, or do you plan to identify the what's in it for me or the value added for data contributors with respect to sharing data and providing good metadata and documentation?
Well, I have to say that's Jessica, it's a really good question. And I will say that this is where partnerships come in. I think once we establish a true partnership where we have communication both ways, we understand our needs, we understand the benefits of working together and all that stuff, that is much, much easier to define that. What's in for me, what's in for us. That gets defined through talking about it. And we have an established partnership. It's just very easy. We can define it really easy. So I don't see a problem with that. And it's true, I agree that the BBL has the amazing opportunity to lead efforts. And that's what we're trying to do. I think with a little bit of, just with some leadership, we can really align our science needs and work together effectively to tackle those big ecological questions that is driving our work, and being able to together come up with tangible outputs that are clear for everyone. It's a good plan, and that's what it makes me happy every day, just to think about those ways.
I'd like to add just a little bit too. When I really started first working on the idea of a network, which seems like another lifetime ago, is, and being involved heavily with different bird banding organizations, from the state organization to the Inland Bird Banding Association and now the North American Banding Council as well. I've yet to come across the bander that didn't want to be doing something good for birds and have their data be usable. But what I found as I started trying to look into larger data sets was the lack of knowledge of how the data set was collected, because that data was not available. It's not collected, and understandable reason why at this point in time with the BBL, but it just wasn't out there. It said on papers in desk around the country, but it made it clear that things were being collected very differently. And you can come up with answers by bringing everything together, but if you don't have that design control, you don't know what that answer really means. And that's where really the feeling of getting a network that standardized things, because in wildlife work, we will never control all the variables or even have the knowledge of what the variables really are. And so those that we can control need to be controlled. And that's how we collect the data. And that was really kind of the push to come up with a network. I felt there was the interest in banding community out there to collect something that was valuable to bird conservation. Also, having a background in the agencies as well, it's very clear our ability to collect this data is through the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and it's very explicit in who can go out and handle birds. And part of that is to have something good science come out of it. So I think there's a lot of value to the individual. We have the ability to give support and maybe doing your own analysis. There'll be people in the network that can help on that. BBL, Fish and Wildlife Service, all that provide that the network can help bring to bear. But it also makes you part of a bigger work that those that are really trying to answer some of the big pressing questions in today's world has that ability to have a better picture, because again, I'm not sure anyone could ever say, at least in bird work, you ever have too much data. It's just the more you spread it out and break it down, the pieces get smaller and smaller. You have anything to add, Tony?
I mean, I feel like that's how I also see it. I see that we see it all the time with our data. It's just tremendous variation of all the data that is coming in. We see the analysts, how much trouble they have to analyze the data as a long-term perspective from all the different ones. So that's why we see the benefit of coordination and standardized data collection, even if it's just for that question, migration part. It's just key for everything. So we know that there are going to be scientists who are doing their own research and they have their own methods, their own FAT classes, categories, everything. That is fine. I mean, it's for their projects and that's what it fits. And that's why, however, those who are part of a coordinated program, as long as they follow the standard protocol, the data will be easily aggregated and used. But yeah, as I said before, the people who has been publishing papers where they dive into the long-term data set, it's been difficult for them. And a lot of times they even have to narrow and keep narrowing their question because they don't have enough data for A, B, C, or D, or stuff like that. So we feel like that is one radical change of the BBL, trying to think about data sets. And if you, Mark, as one scientist want to do a project, I would like to at least have good metadata from your data and understand more about your data. Now, if you're a coordinated program, well, I also want to have the same requirements of that. And that's why I listed those points that we think they are key for every project and every program, because I know that once they come into our database, in 50 years, somebody is going to be able to understand what it means. They're going to be able to aggregate that data and find ways to make that data usable. So I don't know if that brings that answers your point or brings additional information to your point, Mark.
Yeah. I hope we answered the question that came in there. We can continue to take questions as we go here for either myself or Tony. But try to get into now really what the nuts and bolts of what this program, this initiative is at MMN. We have run 5 workshops so far in the Great Lakes region. We've kind of been shut down in the present conditions right now. A lot of things are just kind of put on hold with the COVID situation, because it's not a situation where we can even think about training people in the field, either for the safety of humans or safety of the birds. So a lot of things are on hold that way right now. We are open and willing to start putting together more workshops as soon as we can, start getting together. What I'm going to be covering here now is really going to be a very boiled down portion of what would be mostly the classroom part of a 3-day workshop, which is the workshops have only been 3 days. It's classroom and field work, because a couple of the most important pieces of data probably we can be gathering right now is on age. And to do age properly, there's a lot of information that a bander needs to really get boned up on molt, because we're really looking at micro-aging as much as possible to make the data the most valuable, but we also have to have trust in the collection of that data. So that's a lot of what the training is that we put on during these workshops. And that's kind of the direction it's going. North American Banding Council now is also going the same direction of really looking at micro-aging and being more concerned with training people to improve their skill rather than really assess their skill. And that's, I think, we can do a lot for the banding community. So the program, we wanted something that was very flexible, recognizing we not only want to approach new banders coming out of school or into the programming now. But there's a lot of important data that's out there from stations that's been involved for many years. I mean, our station now has been over 30 years and we're not one of the old ones. So we have to recognize there's a lot of already existing data out there. How can we make that data usable as well? So we need, and most of this workforce is a volunteer workforce. So we need to be flexible where we can, but also there are some things that just have to be done certain ways. We wanted a program design that would provide data for the global questions, life cycle models, connectivity, which is just extremely important, conservation, because we are so far behind some of the other bird groups. Everybody points to, well, we know so much about ducks, and we do. Part of it's been because there's been such a regulatory responsibility there. But we don't know enough about ducks, quite honestly. And we do maybe about mallards and Canada geese, but most all the other species ducks go off of what we know about mallards. So to say that, well, we know everything there, we don't. We're talking about several hundred species in landbirds alone, not just 25 or 30 species. And there's no reason to feel that these landbirds are any different than ducks in a lot of ways. There is the species and then there's populations of species. And those populations may have different threats against them. And that's where the connectivity part of the life cycle models and the global questions comes in, is identifying these different separate populations that could be under different situation threats, whether it could be on the breeding grounds, it could be on the wintering grounds, it could be the stopover sites, any one of those. And to be able to get migrational data in there and use that maybe as the nexus to get at the two ends of their life cycle all helps answer some of those. We also recognize right at the beginning that we need multiple levels of participation. And the next slide I'll go into all of those levels, but it's also multi-methodologies, because no methodology is without weaknesses and with strengths. So what we looked at here was 3 fairly common methods that are used in bird work. Banding, which is by far the qualitative data, because not only you know what that species is, you've got reasonable chance that you know what sex it is, what age it is. You'll have information on how well is it doing at that time. So a lot of energetic questions, things like that you can't get any other way. But banding isn't equal for all species either. As far as you can capture in the same way. You know, study that Peter Mayer was talking about earlier of yellow-billed cuckoos. Well, banding, misnets aren't really the best thing for yellow-billed cuckoos as far as holding them. They bounce very easily, so you can't compare capture rates of cuckoos with a warbler or a thrush. So there's some problems there. So a way of getting at that is bringing in other methodologies that can play against the weaknesses of the other, and together ultimately make a model that we can move forward on the species. So point counts, but a very standardized point count that it can be done similarly across the way. And there's issues with migrational point counts that are very different than breeding point counts. I think probably point counts was originally developed for breeding situations, and we moved them into the other parts of the life cycle, and that brings along other problems. And third is the daily list, which is the least qualitative, but it's just quantitative. You know, whether it was 1 or 10,000, you don't know. It's just a presence absence, it's 0-1 data, but it does have the ability to add to specific questions. Not every question, but some questions. Again, we're looking at, we want a program that's flexible enough to get at the vast majority of questions we can think of. And then the researcher that wants to look at that data set from across the region, they have to decide, okay, was, you know, this piece of data like that collected in the way I need to, for the design to fit the question I have. That's made by the researcher We're just trying to provide the information there to help as many researchers as possible. So the protocol levels was then to develop 3 levels within this. What I'll call the master banding station is the stations that are run daily. There's not many of those. They tend to be generally observatories that hires some staff to be able to operate it daily. But it's they're kind of like the control of everything else. And of course, we say they're operated daily, but that's weather permitting. Again, just another example of why, there's always missing data, and how do you deal with that? So you try to reduce that down as much as possible. Then you have the stations that would fit most everybody, the periodic banding stations. They're intermittent in their operation. Maybe they can only work weekends, or they can set up a schedule. I can be out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, things like that. It also fits into individuals that on a given day, they cannot run all their nets because of personnel and a lot of different things. This system has the ability that a location being run by an individual or individuals could actually be running 2 different stations at once. One that would be more of a constant, this is always done, and then the other part being the ones that, well, I can, on 50% of the time out here, I could run another 5 nets. Well, those 5 become a different station. You just handle the data separately. It doesn't affect the information that the person's been collecting all along, but standardizes that first group of nets, which become their main station. Maybe a master station, or maybe it's just 2 different periodics. And then the 3rd level is point count locations. And that's where we don't have the skill and expertise everywhere that we could probably use to really get at data to answer some of the really big landscape questions that the Fish and Wildlife Service or state agencies or USGS are needing to try to answer. But because point counts are a standard method within this protocol, a local Audubon chapter or something like that could run point counts exactly the same way that the banding station are running, and add another location to help those questions that can use that methodology. Again, it comes back to the question, is design fit your question? So they can pick they'll have this all compartmentalized and can pick out what a researcher may want to work with. So there's 3 levels. Stations run every day, stations that's run periodically. And I mentioned, like we can, it could be someone where you can go in for 2 weeks. That's the only time you got. You're going to run every day for 2 weeks, but you're not covering the majority of the banding of the migrational period. That would still be classified as a periodic station. So there's multiple ways it can work like that. And then, where appropriate or available, you have the ability to supplement this with radar, telemetry, and acoustics, all of which adds more data points to an overall data set that researchers then can tap into. The network sample design, our objectives again is standardization. So that we may not be comparing Macintosh to Jonathan apples, but they're all apples. We're not have a mixed bag of apples and oranges and watermelons and pineapples, which quite honestly is pretty much where we've been at in migration banding. So it's getting that standardization there of it so that it can get at the bigger questions and help individuals be able to compare to other individuals. It's a multi-method protocol to try to correct for some of the weakness of each method, any one of which by themselves has more difficulty, but together maybe provide a much better modeling capability. And we want to look at spring and or fall. I have to admit, when I first started this whole operation, along where we're located, along the north or south shore of Lake Erie, we are, spring migration may not be any greater anywhere in the country than it is along the western basin of Lake Erie, especially for diversity. It's pretty well been shown it's pretty good. And we will band twice as many birds in the spring as we would in the fall, when there should be 3 to 4 times as many birds available. So that's lake effect. And so having stations in other locations are going to give much different answers. It also appears that maybe we are at the core of the migration. So our age ratios may be different than areas farther out, away from core migration areas. So it's all things, again, having a network of multiple stations working together makes for a better picture of conservation. And surprisingly, there's a lot more work being done in the fall than in the spring. A lot of places catch almost nothing in the spring. They don't even do it anymore, where they do pretty good in the fall. So that was somewhat of a surprise to myself. That's been kind of reversed from most everybody else. But having both spring and fall data allows us to do comparative analysis or looking at the factors of winter and summer as well. And comparing age ratios between fall and spring has the ability to really get at some of the winter questions that maybe we can't get at because they aren't studyable and for the most part in where they're going to winter. We don't even know where many of them go to winter. So it does give us a snapshot, and that snapshot becomes having more frames to it, the more stations that are involved. Until at some point, maybe we have a movie we can really look at that we don't have presently. Well, real quick to kind of go through the three different methods, the capture methodology, of course, banding. We're looking at all aspects of this. It's not just a case of slapping a band on a bird and, it goes on its merry way and you yours. We want to look at, new captures, how the data is collected, standardization of that collection, and recaptures. For many questions, recaptures may be the most important part, both as recaptures at the same site for stopover or potential of a migratory return that gives some site fidelity. All these importance. The number of nets that are used, how they're used, are all extremely important as well. The point count methodology, again, it's kind of looking at the method in perspective. Again, what originally point counts were brought on about. The difference between migration and breeding. Unfortunately, and of course, today's analytics are definitely improving and coming up with more ways of looking at it, but generally, it's fairly safe to say that most statistical methodologies are dependent on closed populations, and which can be kind of quote unquote said for breeding. Once the bird's on territory, it's kind of closed. Anybody that works with birds knows that's not totally true. But in migration, it's totally open population. What you have today may be totally different tomorrow. So those can create a dual perspective or problems for point counts. Detectability, which is always a problem. You can look at visual and audio, how they're collected, distance. Right now, we have not included any distance sampling at this point into the protocol. It's always something that can be added on. The big thing is the green up, brown down phenology on detectability. Again, during the breeding season, pretty much what you have when you first time go out is pretty much habitat-wise what you got the last time you go out. Where anyone that's familiar with migration, if you go out early April and do a point count at the end of May, you're in a different situation, the same way as August versus November. And that's an important thing to take into account is your detectability and visibility. One of the things we've done, we've not put it as part of the protocol yet, I think it's going to go in there eventually, is doing a Robel poll analysis of looking at visibility. I think can help in probably down the road in modeling to improve on the visibility of birds. But what we've seen the most is it's going to be very important in seeing different leaf out in the spring or loss in the fall, which is a potential climate change thing that we'll be able to build a data set that actually can show that leaf out is earlier or it's variable from year to year, all of which can affect the detectability of a bird. The third is the daily bird list. It's strictly a presence absence. But when mixed with the other methods, does add value to it. Standalone maybe doesn't tell you a whole lot, but especially for rare species, you may not have caught that bird that day. You may not have had it on your point counts during the morning, but somebody in your crew has seen it sometime during the season or during that day. So you start getting outside bounds of migration. So it does bring a layer of value to an overall review of what's going on. So it's how it fits into the other methods. Going back to banding, try to get just what some of this real standardization is what is a station. When we start getting the stations registered, we've got a couple that's already on. There's definitely some other ones just kind of sitting out there waiting for me to get back to them. Just a lot of things that's kind of put us in a holding pattern for a little while. But what makes up a station? When are you out there time-wise? The number of nets need to be standardized. So you will use the same nets, the same number of nets every time. That's what makes up a station. Time, the standardization in the protocol is a half hour before sunrise to 11 o'clock. That's your objective. Station can run longer, and they can, certain days or whatever, they can't go as long, but at least you have that as a standardized attempt to go after. Mass collected relatively the same way. There is a standardized fat level, which is the modified Helms and Drury that we've developed. Is very efficient in collecting and also in standardizing across observers. Dates, pretty much what we're looking at is being able to collect data within 75% of the migrational period where possible, and then having a standardized habitat map. And this is going to be more of a simple thing. Misnet operation, again, the standardization, same nets, same locations every year, every season that you're out there. To change them around is really, you're no longer sampling the same area. No two nets are the same in capture. We did some work with that, and it changes during the season. It changes with different species. So you start playing with net locations, you definitely are affecting your standardization of data collection because there are definitely species differences. And by keeping them in location the same place, you take that variable out. Same way with the number of nets. If you can run 10 nets normally, that's what you do. Kind of the gold standard is the number of nets you can run is the number you can handle in your worst case scenario. Figure out what the worst kind of conditions you can have as far as the number of birds and what you normally have people-wise, whatever, and that's the number of nets you can run. Doesn't matter if 90% of the time you can run twice as many. Your station is your worst case scenario. If most of the time you could run additional nets, those additional nets can become a second station, and you can handle them as just keep the data a little bit separate. It's not really hard to do. Type of nets definitely are the same. All the time. Again, they all have their different problems as well as 30 millimeter versus 36. Open and closed time standards are to be kept the same. Your open time is when your middle net, if you have 10 nets, your fifth net goes up. Closed time is when the fifth net comes down. While it's not perfectly always equal, it takes about the same amount of time technically to do the first half of the second half. So by going to the middle time, some of those nets are already been open, some haven't been. It just standardizes it. The net run standard is very important. Is all net runs, the time that goes with the birds is the end of the net run, because migrational movement is related to the time of day and sunrise. So those birds are captured by a certain time. This is one of the things that's been more different for people that's using this protocol and getting used to, but it's a very important point of the biology of the bird. and using the net run time as the end of the run. Age classifications, again, this is going to be very important for life cycle modeling. So we get the age ratios, the productivity, survivorship, recruitment, all that. And it will help us with the future direction. And the more we can train people, the more experience people get with microaging, the more accuracy and precision we'll have that will feed into these models. Energetic condition, we said fat classing. Again, this is important for a migratory bird. It's not something that's really an issue for MAPS because breeding birds tend to have no fat. But how good is the bird doing when it's at your station is very important. It also is very important to have that collected for a stopover. Is the bird going down, going up? All that kind of stuff. Again, standardizing, everybody doing it the same way makes it comparable across the areas. We are using both the modified Helms and Drury, and we will accept the maps as they can be fairly easily. At least it appears to be that we can make a comparison of the two methodologies there. Big part of what the MMN is about is bringing multiple methods together. We see bringing the people that's in the field, collecting, getting the hands on the birds is needed for many of the cooperative auxiliary methods. It helps in broad range project cooperation, color marking, telemetry, modus, feather, blood collection, radar, all those things. By having a list of cooperators that are working in the field, a researcher that has a very specific question on a very specific species that wants to get some radio tags on, here's a list of people that you may be able to work with because they're catching the type of bird you're wanting to get. So it makes the network a repository for potential collaborators for a given research project. And if we want to try to get a major radar project going on, they can be set up in the vicinity of a banding station or something like that to get much more value. One of the questions that we've been looking at with USGS, they had a radar station or site set up at our banding stations for 2 years. Radar work, I know, is exhaustive in analysis, but one of the questions hoping to get there is, what is what we catch the next day in banding? What's it really mean to birds migrating? Is there a relationship to migrating birds that's passing over versus what a banding station catches? Because we can get banding probably in a lot more places we can radar cost-wise. So there's a way of working those together and making each of them more valuable. Just quick example of modus, the value of that and the telemetry. This was a bird that we caught several years ago. It's a gray cheek thrush. It had a Spanish language band on it. Come to find out, it came from Selva at Santa Marta Mountains in Colombia. Contacted them. They were excited. It's the first bird of all several thousand gray cheeks they had been that had been recovered in the United States or in North America. They were excited about it. They've been doing this for years, and finally they've had one band seen again. They got involved in modus, I believe, the next year, and I don't have the exact data, but I think they had between 15 and 20 birds picked up on modus towers in the North America. But we still need the banders to get their hands on the birds to put those modus transmitters on. So depending on what your question is banding really the end of your project or just a beginning? Also looking at isotopes, trying to connectivity, banding can provide that, and we can provide it through a network of having a well spread out data set. Whether it's isotope to use for trying to develop connectivity between different portions of life cycle or looking at DNA of populations. We assisted in some work being done on looking at the DNA of yellow warblers across its entire range. So those are all possibilities that can be done. And of course, as I mentioned, of radar, just being able to put these different methodologies together gives us more information at some of the bigger questions we're trying to get at. Habitat data, we're looking at a classification system that is very simple, just useful. We're not trying to get a major thing. It's just trying to, again, a researcher can look at what the habitats are. Their manners may be lake effect versus inland. They have the ability to look at that to see if that could affect what data of the data, total data set that they want to use. Right now, the data will be going two different places, banding and recapture data to the banding lab. We are working with them closely, as we've already discussed, in making sure that some of the auxiliary data, like weight and fat, and like that, can all be collected as part of the record. Cooperators will be given a station number. That number will be part of every banding record, as it will be part of every other data set that comes out of this. And that is that field that's the integrating the different data sets together by the researchers. The rest of the data will be a clearinghouse, the data center. It'll be the data repository presently for habitat, effort, registration. It'll be where we'll house the protocol and do communication to everybody. So that's pretty much where we're at on it. Sorry, I've been seeing a lot of questions. I think the questions coming in here. You have to bear with me a little bit here. This is new territory for me as well. I'm just glad that our internet held out here. So that is pretty much the program. We'd like to entertain both me and Tony. If you'll help us out here a little, Stephanie. Any questions we might have. I gotta figure out how to get out of this. There it is. There.
Hey, Mark, I want to mention something very quickly before I forget. You mentioned that you got recapture in your nets from La Selva. Is that right? Is that what you were
That's
saying?
correct, yes, yes.
It's funny, you and me talking here, and you got one of my birds from my sites in the Caribbean islands.
Right.
Funny.
Yeah. Makes it realize it is a small world. Birds are worlds of two worlds. Yeah, I think that we ended up right off the Yucatan, I believe.
Right there from the Yucatan island, and then I banned it, and then you got it here in Ohio.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I'm helping out with the questions. Then I'm going back to the first question earlier. Was for Antonio. The question was, if increasing banding will increase recoveries and hence our knowledge and understanding, why doesn't the BBL take an approach more similar to European banding schemes, that is allowing people with training and experience to band in an effort to increase probability of recovery and overall monitoring?
Actually, I think that's a really good comment. I think it's from TJ Sensel, right? I think it's a really good comment, and I can say that the BBL over the last, I will say, 4 or 5 years where I've been closer with the BBL, it's been basically changing radically. And I think I mentioned one of my slides how we see the community banders is changing radically. So it's really forcing us to start opening up more and more. So I think in Europe, they from the beginning they initiated with this community program, and in our case, our history is different. We started from the federal government, and we've been keeping the federal government. But just to answer your question, yes, we are opening more and more, and we hope to adapt ourselves. One of the things that I can say is that the BBL, the USGS BBL, feel like our evolution over time, it really depends on both science needs and our users needs, both ways. So we're heading into that direction little by little.
All right, our next question was a comment from Jeff Bueller on the sampling method using point counts. And so this is from Mark. The comment was that transect surveys in Jeff's experience have been better for sampling migrants rather than point counts. And it can account for, migrants clumping or flocking in one area. And with walking transects plus distance sampling, it's been used for projects across the Midwest. So maybe you can speak, Mark, to that point of why point counts were selected versus transects for your protocol.
Yes, primarily the point counts fit better with multiple types of habitats. Transects tend to be better for a grassland type habitat. What we've seen was the birds are moving with you or against you or across you. There's a lot of different things there that transects are very difficult to standardize in time. If you're more birds you have, the slower you're going to move. Whereas a point count, you're in a spot for a certain amount of time, which keeps it very standardized. The transects are a little more difficult to do that with. Mostly these point counts are within a banding station, so you're not talking about a large area. Now that could change a little bit if you were going to kind of a situation where, okay, all we're doing is point counts. We might do something longer. But even then, the point count is a more standardized space and time method than what transects are in a migrational situation where things can rapidly change from one day to the next. That was from my experience and why we ultimately chose that, was the transects had more variability that it was very hard to account for in a migrational setting. I won't disagree that distance is ultimately, I think, something that we need to really be looking at how we fit that in. But even then, distance sampling still comes in problem when you have a major change in habitat during your surveys.
All right, our next question was again for Tony, and I see you answered this in the chat, but maybe you can speak more on this. Does the BBL codify data collection protocols in the BBL database, for example, with the MMN efforts?
Yeah, and we're currently not doing that, but that is one of our lists, and we actually spend a lot of time already trying to figure out how we can restructure our database to do that. And this is what I call program-specific protocols that basically define the ways you are collecting the data and explains and has all that information specific to you. So we are definitely considering that. We are not doing it right now.
Okay, thanks. Next question is for Mark again. Question was, for a periodic banding station, so not ever operating every day, is there a minimum number of days required per week to be classified as a periodic banding station? And would it be sufficient to do periodic banding and point counts to follow the protocol?
There's not a minimum. We have discussed that as, is one net, enough type thing. But there really isn't a minimum per se. It comes down more to what a person is capable of doing, and if they can follow the protocol, they're putting another spot on the map. The question then comes to the researcher: is there adequate data in that site for the question they want to try to get at, is whether they can use that data or not. For some question, it definitely could be used, but not necessarily maybe as many as a station that's run more often. But that becomes a decision of the researcher that wants to do the analytical work as to what they can use. As far as the field cooperator, as long as they can meet the requirements of the time frame and that part of the protocols, it fits the protocol and is usable, even if it's 1 day a week. You know, if you're only going out 1 day a season, you need to think yourself, is this worth the time that I'm doing? You know, that's an individual decision that has to be made then.
All right, and then I have a question, or well, maybe more a comment about, you know, thinking of, Mark, you mentioned that for this protocol, it's ideal, or to meet the protocol requirements, you can't move nets around. But the comment was that it may be a matter of what questions you're asking. And so I guess the comment was, you know, if you're moving the nets around, it's more about sampling the habitat or location rather than the kind of exact location of. So maybe perhaps in some cases moving the nets might not make a difference, but maybe you can just speak more on that, and you know how that might affect whether or not you're following the protocol.
I guess the first part, yeah, if you are working on a project that you have very specific questions you're trying to answer, and that you're trying to compare different habitats or something like that, you know, that's your protocol, and it's getting at a very specific question. For to fit into what the network is trying to do, standardizing those locations makes it comparable from season to season, year to year, where we've looked at on our sites and work where, you know, nets that are 10 yards apart give very different pictures of birds at the very same time. So if you're moving the net around, you do not know what you're really affecting, because you don't know what it would have done if it had been in another spot. And you're just adding another variable to your data that makes it that much more difficult to compare. So yeah, the first thing would come back to, if you are working on a very specific question yourself, and that design fits into getting at your question, you do it. But to be able to put data into the network, we need to try to standardize those type of parameters, because it does matter. Not only on a given day, but throughout the season, it changes. And we can be very, very site specific, and micrositing does make a difference. That makes it hard to compare on a long-term project.
All right, and it looks like just one more question here came in about the point counts. So someone mentioned they've been doing point count surveys for the last few years and have the data, and they're just looking for where to enter it.
Okay, that's one of the things that's going to be coming out hopefully in the next few months. It will be getting up to everyone that's gone through the workshops. Anyone else that has interest can contact the network. But we will be getting those not analytical per se, but data entry requirements out. There will be housed in the Midwest Avian Data Center. We've already worked with Point Blue, and they've got the procedures worked out that it can be entered into an Excel file and uploaded into the network, or you'll be able to enter right straight into the Avian Data Center. That information will be coming out definitely before the end of the year. And we'll be able to get this program back moving rapidly forward, I think.
That's all the questions I have now. Oh, sorry, one more question from Tara. Will station numbers be assigned at the same time data upload information is provided?
For those that have turned in their registrations and we've been able to verify everything, yes. Otherwise, we'll maybe coming back. Before you can enter it, you'll have to have the station number. So whether it's given at the same time or you get it before that, yeah, you will have to have that. But we'll be getting that taken care of, yes.
Follow up to the net placement question from TJ Zenzel. If a tornado impacts a study site, will you continue to sample an area devoid of vegetation or move the net to sample the correct habitat?
Well, I guess my first would ask, what is your question you're trying to get at? The second is for the network's purpose. You've had a major change in the habitat of your site, and what was before is no longer the same for afterwards. So you almost have to look at it as this is a new site, and either you set up a whole new net grid, either in, which would probably, I would look at is what do I envision this place to look like in 10 years or 20 years, and I want to put my nets up to take advantage of that. And then you spend the time between now and then and really looking at how birds react and change over time. We have had that happen at our site. We were able to get most all the nets in the same places, but those that didn't, they just, the nets we had to move got a new number. And so there's, net 15 is no longer exists, but now net 25 does. And we move on forward like that, because then we can still look at individual nets to do comparisons for longer term data sets. That's, again, one of those variables that you can't control, and you have to try to control for as best you can, but recognize that it's throwing a lot of variability and gray into your data that you have to account for.
That's all the questions I have right now, but I was prompted to remind everyone about the session that is tomorrow. The Wind Wildlife Coalition team will be meeting tomorrow morning at 9:30 Central, 10:30 Eastern, and you can use the same Zoom link to participate, as well as join using the registration link that I'll put in the chat.
I'd like to throw out too, just, some of these questions that I would ask you, I think really probably deserve longer, more in-depth answer and discussion back and forth. For anybody that's interested, we'd be glad to either, I don't know if we have the ability through the Facebook network to take questions, or I can take them directly through my email as well. But gladly try to answer any further questions anyone has, or any question or interest anyone has in the network, and sample design on setting up a banding station or anything like that. We'd be glad to try to discuss that more in depth with anybody. I believe if we have no further questions, that I think ends this, and does not, Stephanie? We done for the day?
Yep. Yeah. If you're good, we can close up, and we'll have the recording available so we can send it out to people at the end of this. So then you'll be able to look back on this for anything that you miss. So we'll have a follow-up email for everyone that registered, and we'll also post the links to our website, which is midwestmigrationnetwork.org.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Stephanie.